Welcome. My name is Brian Faulkner, and I'm the music director here at First Presbyterian Church in Lincoln, Nebraska. We want to welcome you to this. Since we can no longer meet in person to do worship and music, and we can no longer have our Arts for the Soul concert series events, we thought that it would be nice to bring you something special today that you could watch at home or anywhere else and any time. So today what we're going to have for you is a special musical treat. Our organist, Dr. Charles Orr, has picked out 3 pieces that he is going to play for you. And in addition, he's going to tell you a little bit about the organ and how it works, as well as talking to you a little bit about the composers of these pieces and a little bit about the music. So we're very thrilled to have Charles put together this little mini concert and organ demonstration for you. And hopefully you'll enjoy this until we can have time that we can be back in person to worship and do music as well together. So now I'd like to give you Dr. Charles Orr.
When I'm playing, it's not often that actually you get invited into the console area to see actually what's going on. One of the interesting things about our language is that commonly we say, and everybody understands it, pull out all the stops. Well, that's actually organ talk. Can you believe it? And what it literally means is that these white knobs that I'm demonstrating right here for you now are actually stops. And if I were to pull all of them out, which is pretty close to what I'd be doing right here, if I pull them all out, it'd be a tremendous sound. And pulling out all the stops means go for it, okay? And so I'll give you a little idea of what that might sound like. Are you ready? It's going to be scary. Okay. Now, in today's world of electronic gadgets, I have a button over here on the side when it works, which is usually. It takes all the stops and puts them all in. So actually, pulling out the stops makes them speak individually, and they have very strange names like terz, nazard, vox humana, cornet, forniture. These are all names that it's very difficult to use on the street because people don't understand what that means. But across history, all of these things have been developed. The organ came into being, we think, around the 3rd century BC. It was called a hydraulis. And it was called that because water was used to displace the air that was in a chamber, and that forced air actually was blown through a pipe. And there's some stories of horrific noises that these instruments would use, the hydraulis. Now, in today's program that I'm doing, I'm going to play 3 different pieces. One is by composer by Lefebvre Willy, who lived in the middle of the 19th century. And then the next one is these are all composers who lived in France. And I'm doing that because I think the sequence of one to another might be helpful in showing you some of the details of what really goes on. The second composer that I'm playing is composer César Franck. These were big names at earlier times, even in just general society. And the last one that I'm playing is a composer by the name of Charles Marie Widor, who died in 1937, the year after I was born. And so we have about 100 years of which some of these pieces are representative of different styles of organ playing that was going on. And during this time, there was so much development in technology that made it easier and easier for the organist to control all the mechanisms that were in front of them while playing, okay? So that while playing, they could operate levers, like I can operate levers with my feet, and I'll demonstrate that a little bit more later. Okay, enough talking. This piece is called Sortie, which stands over the top of almost all doorways in France, means exit. And the composer's name is Louis James Alfred. It was very typical to have these multiple names, Le Fiber Willy. And actually, his name was Louis Willy. Okay, so, but he thought that was really sort of plain. So he created other names that went along with it so it would sound more sophisticated. He was perhaps one of the best known composers for the organ in the 19th century. He played, just as one example, he played for Chopin's funeral. And he was one of the favorite players of a famous organ builder, Cave École. And they knew that when Willie came to play, everybody loved it. And this music was actually directly derived from the music that was heard at the Folies Bergère, or the music that was heard in dance halls. The fathers of the church were a little bit taken back by this because more people came to hear these pieces than they did actually to hear the sermon. All right, well, there we got it out. Okay, Sortie by Le Fiber Willy. on, you could almost go skating, or you could do some fancy footwork with something. Okay, so now you've got a little bit of idea of why perhaps there was some concern about what was happening to music, because this wasn't at all like Gregorian chant or the great traditions that had been going on with church music in general. But nonetheless, Willie was so popular that those issues sort of faded to the side, and people just loved to hear him play and stomp their feet and clap their hands and did whatever it took, and he was very successful. All right. Now, the next person that I'm playing from is a man by the name of César Franck. There could hardly be a sharper contrast. Franck was a classical, his classical attitude was in form and in music, harmony. He was progressive, but he was definitely classical, sober, as it would be. Now, this piece is dated 1890. The other one that I just played was maybe a little bit more like 1860. This is the middle movement of the third organ chorale by César Franck. The middle movement it's an adagio movement. One of the things that's happened is that the score now is full of dynamic changes. Okay, now what would make a dynamic change? Because if you play an organ note, either soft or loud, it's a volume is the same. But when you play a note on a set of pipes that is in a chamber, it's in a container, you can actually change the volume. Listen to this. And I'm controlling that with my foot. And these are, it's in a chamber that is one wall of which is made up of louvers or Venetian blinds. You can think about it that way too, like you might have with your window. Okay, so it can be completely closed or a little bit in the middle or completely open. And that's the way in which the sound then, if you were inside the chamber, it would sound exactly the same regardless of where the louvers were positioned. But for purposes of volume control, there's a lot of variety. The other thing that was very noticeable about César Franck is that he played expressively. Tempo rubato, it's called. So you can actually slow notes down just a little bit or speed them up just a little bit, as long as you kind of keep the pulse the same. And so that's going on. It's more expressive. It makes the instrument more like, I suppose one of the models that they had before them was the piano, because it was capable of doing dynamic changes, and also the composers also took great liberty with tempo, whereas the early composers almost always kept a solid beat. Like, just think Vivaldi, for example. It's just clicking in those notes right off, one right after the other. They're all exactly the same in tempo-wise. But this is very expressive. You'll hear quite a bit of difference. Okay, and the depth, also the color, the request of the player is to play the melody with an oboe and the accompaniment with a flute. Okay, so I have that already set up here, and César Franck, Chorale number 3 in A minor, and this is the middle movement. The music of César Franck. I will just relate it, just a brief story. You might think that's a very simple piece and there's really nothing to it. You wouldn't believe how the French can argue over almost every note, every phrase that's in the thing. Everybody claims to be the authority in how to play it right. Okay? So I asked one of the very famous organists in France one time, I asked a question of how do you do this particular thing? And it really was related to a trill, but her name, Marie Clara Lan, she turned to me and she said, if you're French and if you have good breeding, you will know what to do. To which I think I said in my own mind, well, I'm not French, and I have no complaint about my breeding, but nonetheless, that's just the way it is. And they are very rigid. They have whole schools of people who think this is the way in which it's to be done. Now, one of the things that's fascinating about in music history, and around the time of Bach, you didn't play music that was more than 40 years old. You just didn't play it. It just wasn't, you just moved on. But as time moved along, and in my own training, I just played one historic piece after another from a variety of centuries, and almost every teacher seemed to have just exactly the right way in which it should be done. All right, now the next piece I'm playing is a piece by Charles Marie Widor. This is the Fourth Symphony, the finale, the last movement. And if you could see the score, in the first measure, it has 3 Fs. That means pull out all the stops, I think. That means this is going to be a blast. Okay, now you'll see all the way along, we'll have pianissimo, all right, piano, and we have little crescendo markings. Then we have crescendo. So the volume is continually changing, and we turn the page, and here again we have triple forte. We have lots of articulation marks, and almost every detail in the score is laid out in a way in which the composer wanted it to be played. Widor wrote 10 symphonies. Okay? They were actually just collections or gatherings of pieces that he called symphonies. They were contrasting movements, fast, slow, loud, soft, etc. This one is not soft. Okay? So I hope you've learned something, a little bit about the organ anyway. It's kind of a mini class. And being a teacher all these many years, I just can't get away from it. So hopefully you've learned a little bit, and now we're going to hear the finale from the 4th Symphony. You probably all know the toccata that finishes the 5th Symphony, but this is a little different. This is not as well known. That's why I selected it. Here we go. And thank you for joining today, and again, I hope you've learned something.